All right, welcome to IAEI News Live. We have a special guest today, which is Larry Ayer, Correlating Committee Chair, and we're going to talk about Correlating Committee activities, and it all starts now. All right, Larry, welcome.
I think you need some music there in that intro, so we got to work on that.
You know what it is? Everybody else can hear the music, but you can't. So, and that's okay. The important part.
Yeah, it's okay.
And we got Jody Wages out there in YouTube land. So welcome, Mr. Ayer.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom.
Oh, very glad you carved the time out of your busy day to talk about Correlating Committee activities. And why don't we do this? Why don't you just give everybody out there a little update on who Larry Ayer is and talk a little bit about your current role as Correlating Committee Chair.
All right, thanks. Yes, my name is Larry Ayer. I'm located in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am Vice President of BizCom Electric. So I'm an electrical contractor as well as an engineer, licensed engineer in several states. So I also do mechanical and electrical design. And so I've been doing that for like the past 30 plus years. And I'm fortunate to have been nominated to be the Correlating Committee Chair. And so we oversee approximately 8 NFPA standards that deal with electricity, such standards as 70B, recommended practice for maintenance, electrical maintenance. We got 70E, electrical recommended practice or standard for safety in the workplace, and the National Electric Code and various other ones. So no, it's good to be here, and look forward to talking to you about the NEC and other things. Yeah,
and you know, it's funny you say "and other things" because, and we were talking about this earlier. I call it the trilogy: 70E for safe work practices and 70B on maintenance. All 3 of those documents are current in play in some level of revision. So the 70B, I know we just had our first draft meeting and we're looking for our second draft meeting coming up. 70E safe work practices just had their first draft meetings and those results. I mean, that was just like a week ago, I think it was, right? Last week?
Correct, just last week.
Yeah, just last week. So there's a lot of activity going on in those 2 documents. And 70B is moving to a standard, which is kind of cool. That's a big change for that document. I think a big change for the industry. And then you have what we all love, the National Electrical Code. And that's in between cycles. I mean, it's in the middle of a cycle, but it's in between the first draft and second draft, right?
Right. So this is a kind of a weird time, given the fact that we do have 70B. 70B had to skip a year because they were making some drastic changes to go from a recommended practice to a standard. So they needed some more time on that. So it just so happens that we have 3 things happening at once. And so there's a lot of things going on. So I know it's probably been a challenge for a lot of people, keeping them busy on trying to make sure that we update these codes and standards, but a very important process nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that. It means an opportunity for the public to provide their feedback. And the National Electrical Code, I believe the public comment date is August, was it 19th? I'd have to double.
Yeah, I thought it was the August. I think you're right, August 19th or 18th, one of the 2.
Yeah, and so what that means is that people should be working on public comments, but from a correlating committee perspective, you have task groups that are focused on looking at what happened in the first draft and then preparing for the second draft. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what that means as far as, what does the Correlating Committee do at this phase?
Yeah, so basically when the committee's finished up sometime in late January. They did their work for the first draft, and the Correlating Committee was able to, between the end of March and the end of April, was able to look at all the work that was done by the technical committees. And they took that work and we kind of divided up into 5 task groups. And those 5 task groups got to review various parts of the code to make sure and look for errors, maybe look for things that did not correlate, maybe that there was something happened in one panel and another panel did something else. So we need to try to get them together to find some type of common ground. So we're always looking for things to improve the code and kind of call balls and strikes and try to make sure it's a cohesive document. And so there's a lot to do in that time frame between late March and late April. And so we met the first week in May. And typically our correlating committee over the past couple cycles of the NEC only had about 200 correlating committee notes. Those are notes that we go back and tell the technical panel, hey, could you review this and make sure you get this right? Or can you look at what another panel did? And so this time we had over 400, I think around 440 notes. So a lot of work was put in the correlating committee. A lot of things were undertaken during this cycle that I think is good for the future of the NEC.
So you mentioned 5 task groups, and isn't there though other task groups that are like an ongoing thing? And the reason I bring that up is the usability task group, I think, is an ongoing thing, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. There's so those 5 task groups are to look at strictly what happened during the first draft stage and to correlate. Then you also have other task groups that we have continuous that are ongoing, like the usability task group. And the goal of that task group is to look at things in the NEC and beyond, and to say, how can we make these documents more user-friendly, over the life of these documents. And then we also have task groups that come out of what we did in May. We might say, hey, we need to get a task group together to kind of fix some things and see if 2 panels can work together to kind of come to a solution. So there's various task groups in various forms all throughout the cycle, and they continue to operate every year.
Excellent. Yeah, you've got the usability. Now, where the one of the first topics I want to talk about here is definitions. And I think that relocation was driven, correct me if I'm wrong, was it the usability task group, or was that from the manual of style or the style manual for the NEC?
Well, so there's 2 things. So the usability task group also handles the style manual for the NEC. And back in March of 2020, just before the pandemic started, we had a little spring planning meeting. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was the correlating committee thought it was a good idea to try to relocate all the definitions throughout the NEC. I'd probably say 80% of all definitions, 70-80% of all definitions already reside in Article 100. But there are, 20 to 30% of the definitions that reside in other articles. And we decided to move those all into Article 100 because we thought, the usability task group thought that was a better way to go. Every single standard that you have out there pretty much follows that kind of theme. And so we thought it would be better. And it was a lot of work, tremendous amount of work that went into that. Dave Williams led that group. Dave Williams, a member of IAEI, he led that charge. And when we did that, we were able to uncover a lot of things that will help improve the code. And so, for instance, when we moved them up to Article 100, for instance, you'll see 6 to 8 definitions of abandoned cable.
Oh, wow.
And so we looked them up and we said, okay, when we do that, we can't have 6 to 7 definitions. We need to find some common ground just for one definition. And maybe when we moved them up, we had 6 different uses of the term portable or portable equipment. And so that allowed us to try to make some changes to improve the code, for this cycle.
So let me ask you, I know one of the big challenges that code panels experience with regard to the second draft meeting or the public comment phase is, quote unquote, what's new material and what's not new material. Now, we moved all the definitions in the first draft. How much can we do? Do we have wiggle room to work with trying to change some definitions or consolidate them during the second draft period? Is that like an easy putt, or?
Well, it depends. It depends if the concept was introduced. So if the concept was introduced during the first draft stage about, maybe there was something that a technical issue someone thought with a definition,
right? Or
maybe if the correlating committee put in a correlating committee note, which is basically a public comment, prior to the comment stage, it says, hey, we'd like you to fix something. So those two things there together allow, kind of open the door for people to make changes to those definitions. If the concept wasn't introduced during the first draft or during a CC note, then it makes it a little more difficult to make changes to those definitions.
Gotcha. Okay, so all the definitions are moving to the to Article 100. Are they still keeping, like, I know before there was a Part 2, which was medium voltage, or are they just putting everything into one part? Which
you're putting everything into one part.
Excellent. Okay. I was just in a meeting. I was doing a training class on 70E, I believe it was, and we were talking about this moving of definitions. And the one individual related a story that they were looking for what a few terms meant and how they related to each other. And they were struggling with going from Article 100 back to the back of the book, back and forth, trying to correlate and understand some of the terminology that was used. And they thought it was attractive that everything was going to be located in one location. So, that was kind of nice to hear that feedback.
There's always going to be, when you do a drastic change like this, you're going to have some people that don't like it. They're used to the status quo. I get that. But there are also a lot of good things. I think, to your point, what you heard from your training class is that when you move everything up, you see a lot of opportunity to fix things. And there was definitions in there. People said, I didn't even know that definition was in there. And so over time, I think it helps us to identify issues that we can improve on. And I think by moving them up front, it will help the user of the code, and it will help us fix some usability issues.
Yep, I love it. Okay. All right, so let's talk about another topic, which is, I think, I would liken it very similar to what we're doing with definitions. You could argue this is all about usability, but like you say, you're uncovering some issues. Medium voltage. So medium voltage applications, I think there are probably a lot of people out there that just associate medium voltage with utility, but there are a lot of installations that fall under the purview of the National Electrical Code. And so medium voltage is getting attention, but they're not looking at technical changes, are they? They're just looking at trying to put some things in the right buckets, so to speak, right?
Correct. So what happened was we put together a task group, and the task group was a medium voltage task group. And one of the things I did as a Correlating Committee Chair was saying, hey, can you look at this to see if the medium voltage is covered well in the NEC? And the task group looked at it and said, we do not think that it's treated with, the necessary emphasis in today's world for that topic. Like you had mentioned, the NEC has been around since 1896. And over that time, most of the medium voltage applications have always been geared towards the utility. So like you said, people think of medium voltage as the utilities work. Back in 1993, the government and people got together and they started to deregulate the electrical industry. When they started to deregulate those things, it took some time for those efforts to take place. And not until probably the last 10 to 15 years is there really been a significant progress. And so as a result, more and more work is being done by contractors and not by the utility. The utility is, as everything else, their costs have gone up. And so they're passing some more things to the owner. And so we need to, we kind of look at this fact that we need to make sure that the medium voltage is done well in the NEC. And so we've done a lot of work on that. And we've had task groups trying to improve that part, not only for the first drafts, but we've had some correlating committee notes to try to make sure that the medium voltage part has been, we added Article 305.
Yep.
We've added Article 245. We had some issues with branch circuits. You think about branch circuits in 210. 210 is really for AFCIs, GFCIs, dwelling units, receptacle placement. But it also technically covers branch circuits above 600 volts.
Yeah.
So we moved that out to make that a little more user friendly so people can find branch circuits for medium voltage. So with all that work, the Correlating Committee had to say, we got a lot of moving parts here. So how do we make it better? And so we put some task groups together to try to make sure that between the first and second draft, we do a good job.
Yeah, and I was just looking to try to find there. I know they moved. They're creating a new article. Was it 235, right?
Correct. 235. It's a new article strictly covering branch circuits for over 1,000 volts.
But wasn't the plan to also have feeders and services in there as well?
Correct. There was a 235 that was going to cover branch circuits, feeders, and service conductors, but those topics cover two panels. Panel 10 rejected the addition of feeders and services. Panel 2 said, hey, we do not think we have the technical expertise to handle branch circuits over 1,000 volts, given some of the things that I mentioned that are in that article. And they suggested that we get a medium voltage task group to look at it. And part of the thing that came out, the task group said, well, let's go ahead and create 235 for branch circuits only. And it would be the hope, that down the road that we can work together among these different panels to kind of expand on that and add back in feeders and service conductors.
Yeah, and like you said, this is really a long-term type of. It's great to get some changes out there so that people can start looking at the documents and working with it. And I think what will happen is, to your point, we're recognizing some issues with some of the requirements, which will drive more public inputs and comments around the medium voltage applications to, because right now I think a lot of people still look at the NESC when they should be looking at the NEC, because I think the NESC has probably seen a lot more attention because it's what the utility uses, and it's probably, medium voltage is in their wheelhouse. But I think it was somebody on the task group pointed out that, or maybe it was on one of my sessions, that the medium voltage from a utility perspective is a much different person. And they give some leeway, so to speak, for some of those applications, because it's almost like the heavy industrial applications where you have some exceptions because of the expertise and the training in that world. But medium voltage, I mean, we see these at ball fields, we see these in stadium applications, and those where they're running either 4160 around for and stepping it down to do lighting, because it's just more efficient to distribute energy at some of those at that higher voltage. So, but safety and the applications needs a little bit different attention than I think what you might find in the NESC. But
correct. Yeah, there's been so much more that's happened. I've been getting emails. I got phone calls, and when this topic came up, and inspectors say it's tough to inspect on a medium voltage because it's kind of scattered throughout the code. Mm-hmm. I've had users email me and said it's hard, there's not much content. And so we're trying to improve those things.
Yeah. So now, one of the drivers, historically, this isn't the first time that above 600 volts got attention, because remember, I think it was I'd say at least the last two cycles, we moved 600 volts to 1,000 volts. Mm-hmm. Across pretty much every article in the National Electrical Code. And that was driven by alternative energy, because they're pumping power, they're pumping the voltage up. And I was just in a different meeting associated with talking about some applications in alternative energy, and they want to go up to even higher voltages than what we're seeing. So I know a lot of equipment manufacturers are getting pressed hard to provide solutions at these higher voltages in those environments. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the renewable area, whether it be, and I'm going to lump electric vehicles in there too. It's all alternative energy solutions, and I'll say it's an alternative energy to powering four wheels on a vehicle, right? Yeah. But there's a lot of activity going on there, and I think even more than just what's going on in the NEC, because 110, 111, NFPA 99, all of these types of codes and standards are recognizing the presence of alternative energy solutions and sources of power that could be used maybe up in backup energy as well, right?
Correct. And part of the problem I think that we have that I kind of see in this process is that these technical panels over time have a lot of education and expertise in the 1,000 volts and below. And so what happens is when you get it above 1,000 volts, there's a different expertise level needed. And so we're trying to identify ways that we can add that expertise into these technical panels. A lot of times people tend to write rules for medium voltage applications that are based upon the rules you see for 1,000 volts and below. For instance, we always think about marking up breakers or wires.
Oh, yeah.
Breakers and other equipment, 125% for continuous and 100% for non-continuous. And so we tend to use those rules for above 1,000 volts when in practice, everything we see above 1,000 volts is 100% rated. So that's some things that have kind of come out of this that we need to probably make sure that the right expertise is needed as we move this effort forward.
Yep. So let's talk about renewable energy. Now, there's a lot going on in the renewables, and I know that there's a couple areas. One, in addition, that carries the same thing that we're just talking about, because the renewables are pumping their voltages up higher. But I noticed that the renewable energy market or application, to your point, in 210 and 215, we size feeders and we size branch circuits off of load currents. In the PV applications and those similar applications, they don't do that, right? They size their equipment based upon the capabilities of the source. And I think what I'm seeing, at least what I've seen coming across some changes around energy management, and there's a new Article 231, that interconnection with the utility. So can you bring us up to date? Are there task groups associated with the renewable energy area of the code?
Yes, we have about, I think we have 2 or 3 task groups that are dealing with this topic. And I think part of the problem is over time, the code has always been chapters 1 through 4, which have kind of been branch circuits, feeders, and service conductors over current devices. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is we start to get all these sources interconnected, and things aren't like they used to be. We might have a generator, we might have PV, we have all these things. And so how do we use these tap rules? How do we do these things? And so we have to do a better job of trying to get people to work together. And I think part of the problem is it's kind of a turf battle. People like to write their code in PV and say, hey, I'm Article 705, I'm Article 690, and we have to be concerned about how whatever you write interacts with the rest of the book. And so we've always had this thing with 705 where people will call things power source output conductors and things that power source disconnecting means. And I've sat in on a couple task groups and people are kind of confused on the terminology. Now, of course, the PV people, they understand it, mm-hmm. but the people maybe in Article 230 say, well, I don't understand where you're coming from. And so we've got to do a better job communicating and working together as a team to try to fine tune that language. And so what we did was someone submitted a public input to create a new article for 231 because they didn't like the way 705 was written. And so we got a task group together between the first draft and the second draft. And the correlating committee said, hey, let's call time out here. Let's figure out who's got purview. And the correlating committee said, let's try to work together. Those conductors are not really power source output conductors on the line side of a PV disconnect. Those are service conductors. And that disconnect is a service disconnect. And we want you to make sure that language that you're putting in the back of the book matches up with the language in the front of the book. So that's one task group that's working to make sure that we have kind of common terminology and usability. We also have another task group that is working on microgrids. Microgrids, we have an Article 712, that's DC microgrids, and we also have microgrids that are in 705. And really, there's really not much difference between 705 and 712. So we said, hey, can you go back and look? We don't really think we need 712. Can we try to eliminate some redundancy? So that's what that task group has done. They're recommending eliminating 712 and kind of coming up with better terminology. We also have another task group that is regarding energy management systems. And energy management systems is Article 750. And what that does is basically we have all these sources interconnected, and we have electronic control systems that help govern the current flow. So like, for instance, on electric cars, you might have 100 cars tied to the grid, but they typically have maybe a control system that limits the current flow. So if each car needs a 2,000 watt charger, and there's 100 of them, and you maybe need 20,000 watts or whatever you need for that, you might not need all that given the fact that you have a energy management or a power control system. Yep. So we've had people working on that and making sure that that language is good too. And so a lot of task groups are working on that, and I think it's important.
Yeah. So, I like the way you said that, to make sure that language is good, because that's what we do. We have to create words that are technically accurate and understandable. So there's two fronts that a committee focuses on. So these task groups, I know each of the code making panels during the process. Each code making panel chair, I know this is how we operate on panel 2. Our chair will say, okay, Tom, you have task group number 1. John McCamish, you have task group number 2, and I think Alan Manchi has task group number 3, and we divvy up public inputs. From a correlating committee perspective, you go and transcend the different task groups, right, or the different code panels. So what you're doing is bringing together different code panels to promote that communications that you're talking about, I think, which is really critical, where you have like panel 4 and panel 10 and maybe panel 13, because panel 13 has 701 and 702, or specifically 702 systems. If you think about alternative energy, I know that some of the complaints I've heard were that I have an Article 690 system and I have an inverter. Is that a transfer switch? Do I have to follow the rules in 702? Right. So, and then you'll get that clashing between code panels who are looking at each other's language, try to say, wait a second, you're introducing a new term, or that's not how we all operate. So I think that the activities around some of these task groups is really is beneficial, and hopefully we'll see that in good language, right?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned though. You keep using the term activities, and I keep thinking about the Step Brothers movie. So I'm a little bit, I can't get off of that thought. But I think part of the problem is that the electrical industry, like a lot of industries, are changing, dramatically.
Yep.
And so, for years, we just thought of when you were switching between sources, we're just using transfer equipment. And over time, that transfer equipment has now morphed into, instead of breaking a system and transferring from a utility to generator, now we are just transferring sources or paralleling sources. And as we do that, and as the industry is involved, we got to look at new ways to present the material, because it gets more complex.
Right. And
so people start saying, well, I'm not transferring, I'm paralleling, I'm interconnecting. How do I do that? And so it opens up somewhat of a can of worms, and we got to make sure that we keep coming back and communicating, to find better ways to relay the information. Yep.
And Jody Wages says so much room for activities. And here's the thing. Most of the comments I hear come back to 3 movies, one of 3 movies. Either it was Brothers, right? Step Brothers, The Godfather, or My Cousin Vinny. One of the 3. One of those 3. So we talked about in the renewable energy, the energy management aspect, because I know panel 2 accepted some when you're sizing feeders, especially feeders, and I say services as well, the capabilities of the energy management system to use the reference the set points on those for sizing of feeders and services. But and you mentioned which California, and I had Mike Stone from NEMA, National Electrical Manufacturers Association, on for an event one point when he was educating us in regard to the energy codes and what's going on out in California. And Cal Green just adopted a requirement, but they're not recognizing, they're requiring electric vehicle chargers for a percentage of spaces, but they're not permitting the use of these energy management tools, which I think is in my opinion, a mistake. And I know Mike Stone voiced that same opinion, because I think there's a lot of value to be had in making sure that we don't oversize our equipment, we right size our equipment so that we serve the loads, and not every one of those vehicles, not every one of those charges are going to be used. So some of that demand, I guess, profiling and whatnot is going to be a critical piece of that. So maybe they're going to watch this and say, hey, I want to reach out to the IAEI and get them engaged, because I think there's a lot of value that those who work with these systems and understand what these energy management systems are can bring to the table at the local level in the states.
And that's another example. What you said there is energy management is back in Chapter 7 in Article 750. And just this cycle, you added into 20 a concept for energy management load calculations. And so that's another way that we need to bridge the front to the back of the book and make sure we work together to get some of those things done as the industry evolves.
Yeah. Do you ever see the code breaking up into more than one book? I know this is off the wall, but I've heard people talk about that, like Chapter 8. I had somebody just the other day say, I think Chapter 8 should be its own book. I've heard that. I think that would be very tough to do, and I never see that happening. Yeah. And if it did, under my tenure, I'd have to probably run for the hills, because people would probably try to shoot me. But no, I think that one of the things that we have to do better, though, is we have to make sure that the code changes with the changes that are happening in the industry. So as the low voltage area changes, we have to change with it. We can't, in my opinion, leave the status quo of the way the articles are written. We got to constantly look at ways to improve. And the same thing goes for renewable energy. We have to look at ways to improve to bridge the front to the back. A lot of people strictly just want to look at one article and they don't want to look at the rest of the book. We have to make sure that we look at the whole book holistically and just look at ways to improve. Yep. And I keep thinking about your comment, and I remember you saying this, and I don't know who you were talking to, but I heard you say it more than once. And I sort of, if somebody would ask me my elevator speech on what's Larry Ayer's mission in his new role as Correlating Committee Chair, and I say this, and I don't know, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I sum your efforts up into one word: relevant. And it's keeping the code relevant to the technology and as we progress. And I think that's exactly what you were just speaking to.
Yeah, that's the most important thing is there's so many things that are being changed, whether it's medium voltage or low voltage, and it's not the traditional. We no longer have the traditional load wire circuit breaker. We have a telecom wire, a load, and maybe a network switch. So we have a car charger and sources, and so we have to learn how to let those things interact and figure out what the best structure is moving forward.
Yep. And this new Article 231, what's the survival rate of 231? I mean, I've read through 231. It looks like it's same as what's in 705. There's a lot of similarities there. Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to happen between 231 and 705?
I really don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that the Correlating Committee has asked, two people to get together. We've asked Code Making Panel 10, mm-hmm. which has purview right now over 231, and we've asked Panel 4, which has purview over 7.5, to get together, and we gave them a list of several key areas that we'd like to address. And we asked that they would reconsider 231 since we thought it was redundant to what's in 705. And so they went back, that task group has met, and I've seen some of their work, and they've really put together some things that are in 705 that are really streamlined with really easy to read language.
Nice.
That it's good. It's good. So I think we'll see what happens in the second draft, but that's where we are right now.
Excellent. Okay, so on those lines of correlation and keeping things relevant, we got, and I know I'm chairing a task group on ground fault circuit interrupters or ground fault protection of equipment, because we've got some newly introduced terms back in swimming pools, Article 680, with regard to the special purpose GFCI, which brings me to a different movie, but I'm not going to go there. But the special purpose, and I'm calling it a special purpose GFCI because that's the standard that this device is listed to. Now, we've all characteristically thought of ground fault circuit interrupters at 4 to 6 milliamps. And now we have another technology which is not 4 to 6 milliamps. So, and I know in our task group, we struggled with, do you call it a GFCI? Do you call it GFPE? Because it's not 4 to 6 milliamps, and I can't even say that it's a 20 milliamp device, because it really depends on which standard and which type of device that you're dealing with. So I know that we've got this task group that's looking throughout the code saying, how are we using the terminology ground fault circuit interrupter? Or in some places, we just say ground fault protection. And what does that mean? And does the reader understand that? So, and I think because it's a correlating committee task group, how did this hit the table for the correlating committee? I mean,
well, I think that there's the GFCI is used and GFP is used quite frequently. I think under the purview of Panel 7, a lot of the deal around different things like marinas and bodies of water.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people think that you got GFCIs, and then you have devices like your 1200 amp breaker where you can set a dial and set your ground fault. And so, but, and then we started having these things like type, ground fault current interrupters that are like type A, B, C, D, and E. And we got all these different things.
Oh, yeah.
And then we got marinas at 30 milliamps and 100 milliamps. And so people sometimes get confused on the terminology. So part of the effort that this task group is to look at is to make sure that we are saying the correct things, not only in Panel 7, in the articles under their purview, but in other areas of the code. And so that's what we're trying to achieve by making sure that we say the right things and we say what we mean.
Yeah, and I know for the task group and I'm chairing this one here, but they gave me a mix of people from UL to Panel 7 members, Panel 2 members, and the discussions that we've had. Really, I mean, as you look through the National Electrical Code, even down to, I love it, the use of the dash, whether it's a ground dash fault or just a ground and no dash fault, we got into that level of detail in proper use. And I am not the right guy to talk English, okay? I mean, I struggled with English, and I probably still struggle with English and grammar and whatnot. But I'll tell you, that is it makes a difference when you start looking at the dashes and you try to understand the way we use the terminology in the code. And that's been we just concluded that. I believe we just concluded that effort. We got one more meeting to go. And so there's another question. You have a correlating committee task group. These task groups will generate public comments, or are they global comments? I mean, how do they end up on the table of a code making panel?
So these task groups are tasked with trying to solve issues, and for the most part, they are going to submit public comments. They can't submit them in the name of the task group. They will get submitted by one individual. And so as they get those submitted, those will get passed along to the proper technical panel. and they will address what the task group came up with. They might not like it, they might disagree with it, but it's another way of trying to find some common ground to make the code better.
So does the since okay, so this is the correlating committee gets together and says, hey Larry, we need this task group, or you're looking at it with Jeff Sargent and others, and you guys come up with this, we need a task group to look at this. And like say the GFCI task group, I go through with my team, and we come up with all these public comments. Does the correlating committee approve those comments, or do you just wait to see what happens?
No, those comments will get sent to the correct technical panel, and they will review it, and they will, because ultimately the panel is the one that has the technical expertise, and they will decide whether they like the public comment or not, and whether they should make changes. So, for a lot of times, there is some tremendous work that is done by these task groups.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times the committee will look and say, you know what, I really like what they did. But then there are, a small portion of the time they'll say, I'm sorry if I disagree with what you did. Maybe we'll modify it or change it.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Because it's just, you're continuing that ball down the court. So it may be that there's other public comments that takes that concept that these task groups put on the table and say, hey, I love that, but these other ideas help even build it and take it to the next step. So it could morph anyway. You don't know where it's going to go, right? So
you really don't.
Yeah, but it is treated and considered just like any other public comment from anybody else. It's just a focus of a group of individuals to try to address an issue.
Correct.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
All right, and I want to be fair. and then we get into healthcare, and so healthcare. Well, here's what I like about this one. You chaired a task group last cycle where we changed the energy VA per square foot, right? And we say VA per square foot because we don't say watts per square foot, right? Because of power factor.
Yeah, that's one of your sticking points, that you do not like the use of the term watts. But we did chair a task group, and one of the things that's come out of the NEC over the last probably couple of decades, and the drums kind of gotten beaten a little bit louder as we go on. But kind of the way it works is that people are seeing that all these things that we've done over the last 2 or 3 decades, we've saved a lot of energy. Yeah. We've transitioned from incandescent to fluorescent to LED. We've put in variable speed drives. We've done all these things. And yet the code has kind of kept the same load calculations in 220. And so when you size conductors and services, kind of typically in a kind of a typical rule of thumb is, the utility might only have 30% load compared to what is designed by Article 220. So there are efforts out there to try to bridge that gap and to bring it closer. We did that in the 2017 cycle by introducing new and improved lighting demand factors that were a result of the code trying to marry up with ASHRAE 90.1. So we significantly lowered those, in most cases by 50%. Yeah. We're looking at other ways to improve that. We also have the healthcare folks that have went out and done some studies. And, when you get to healthcare facilities, there are a lot of receptacles that are required at patient beds.
Yep, and that's the shift. So what you just did right there was you shifted gears. You went from lighting to the receptacle, and I think that's where I get a little nervous, because lighting is, in my opinion, lighting, and this as well as I do, we looked at the ASHRAE from a commercial building perspective, because we've got to take residential out of there because we lump receptacles and lighting all into the same load calculation. But in the commercial buildings, your point earlier was that we're building these buildings to energy codes for the most part. And that was the struggle of that task group, was does everybody adopt the energy code? And then what version of those codes are they on? So we had to pick a line in the sand on what year we were going to settle on and all that jazz. But now we're shifting over on the healthcare side to the receptacle concern. And I want you to elaborate a little bit more about why a healthcare person would be concerned about the load calculations when it comes to receptacles.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact figures, but I think I think that it used to require 6 or 7 or 8 receptacles in a patient bed. I think that might have got doubled to 16. I'm not sure. And so I think the actual, I was listening in the other day, and I think the healthcare people, even though the code says 16, I think they put 32 receptacles in a room. And so the problem is we have all these receptacles in patient care area, and well, do the demand factors that we have in 220 really work for healthcare? So there's been a lot of studies done that says we think we need to improve those demand factors and reduce load even more based upon how we use them. And I think this goes not only for healthcare, but this goes for everything else that we see out in the world. I don't think we use receptacles the same way we did 30 years ago. And I think people should think about how to use receptacles. What do you really plug into them compared to, a long time ago? And so, and so we need to look at that. And it is, you need data. You need data to back it up, to make sure you look for a change to substantiate it. And that's what the healthcare people are trying to do right now. This has been going on for 2 cycles. The last cycle, they put some things in there, and panel 15 and panel 2 couldn't really come to some common ground. And so we're working again to try to find that common ground. And I think what's happening through this task group is they're trying to narrow the focus, instead of all receptacles in a health facility, to let's concentrate on healthcare receptacles in patient care spaces only. So I think that it's working itself out by communication, and I think they'll come to a resolution.
Yeah, and I know I am personally learning a lot about the issue, and I'm starting to understand more, because to your point, from a correlating committee perspective, what do? You bring people together and you have them communicate with each other. And I always talk, you have the storming, norming, and forming, and some groups always stay in the storming area, but I see this group really gelling in regard to focusing in on the challenges. And on the last call that I know I was on, one of the healthcare individuals made the statement that, look, we have these, say, an operating room where there's equipment, and I can't remember, I think it was, maybe it's a ventilator, and maybe it's not a ventilator. No, it's kidney dialysis machines. And similar, require an individual branch circuit that is specifically for that load. So you might have, in any given area, multiple receptacles that are only there for, say, a kidney dialysis machine or some other piece of equipment that is specifically for that equipment. And that's where they plug that in. And you may or may not see everything used at the same time. So what that group is trying to figure out, to your point, how do we all agree on some language that is that you can take an electrical inspector who can understand, who knows Article 220 and load calculations, who knows individual branch circuits in 210 for branch circuit requirements, and then go over to that healthcare application and be able to look at language and know what it's saying and know how to do the load calculations, because that's one of the challenges that we have right now. I think we have Krista Bison who's basically coming up saying, hey, let's take a look at these and say, how do I implement this language? Is it clear? Is it concise? And the team will figure out if it's technically accurate. So it's really, it's the same thing on all of these. It needs to be clear, concise, and accurate. It's like the recipe for success. Got to be enforceable.
And whatever we're doing up in the healthcare, that terminology needs to be similar terminology to what we use in maybe Chapter 2. So we want to make sure that everything kind of, flows together.
Right. Yeah. And in harmony
That's right. That's right.
I love it. All right, so those are the I think the 5 key areas. You got the definitions moving. You got medium voltage changes going on, and that's probably going to continue. You have renewable energy, multiple task groups looking at the renewable energy. You got microgrids too, right? I mean, you've got the DC microgrids versus AC microgrids, and what is a microgrid? And then do we even need, what is that, Article 712? Is that 712?
Right, 712, and that's a DC microgrid. So I think that's proposed to being deleted.
Oh, that's okay.
What you'll find out too, which is interesting, and Panel 3 has done a really good job of this. But Panel 3, they've gone through a lot of things under their purview. They've taken Article 727, which was instrumentation tray cable. They removed it out of Chapter 7, and they said, hey, this is really a kind of a wiring method. So they moved it to Chapter 3. They had Article 720, which was, I think, systems under 50 volts, which was really geared towards, I think, agricultural farm lighting. And that no longer exists. So they deleted that. So I think that, to your point about relevance, we're trying to move things where they go. We're trying to look at things that maybe aren't relevant anymore, like agricultural farm lighting in 720. We're trying to take, is DC microgrids really a separate thing than AC microgrids, or is it the same thing? So we're trying to make sure that everything goes in the proper place. And so that's that. And the other thing the Correlating Committee has done is we're trying to eliminate redundancy. A lot of times we sit up there and say, hey, go look at, Article 250.122, and we'll say that throughout the book.
Yep.
Well, do we really need to repeat that a lot of times when the user of the code should know that if it has to do with grounding, we're going to go to Article 250 automatically?
Well,
so those are some of the things we're working right now on to improve the document.
Yeah, and I know some people will argue that from a usability perspective, it's always good to pointers are not unhealthy, they're healthy. So, and I know that is one of those that's one of those areas where you just it's hard to make a good balance there, right?
Yeah,
and you're never going to please 100% of people 100% of the time. So everybody out there needs to remember one important thing. They've got to subscribe to the IAEI YouTube channel. Are you subscribed, Larry?
Yes, I am.
Are you saying that just to say that, or are you really subscribed?
I think I am. I'm subscribed to so
We're
much
going to
stuff.
check.
I have to go back and check, but I think I am.
Okay, excellent. I'm so subscribed, and we need to get more people out there to get out to the IAEI's YouTube site, subscribe to it, because in addition to the Tech Tuesdays, the IAEI News Live Tuesday sessions at 12, we're taking little technical snippets from a training curriculum that they have and putting them out there for, I don't know, I call them teasers, but they're educational teasers, right? To let people know there's a wealth of information that the IAEI brings to the table, and you can't get, in my opinion, it's the best quality educational stuff that I know I've learned from, and I know other people have learned from it. And we met at an IAEI meeting too, as an Ohio chapter meeting, right?
That's correct.
And there's always a story behind everything. But I would encourage people to get out there to the YouTube channel, subscribe to it. If you're watching this on LinkedIn or Facebook, just don't forget about that. Get out there to the YouTube site, and membership has its benefits too. So the other thing what else? There was something else I wanted to make sure. Oh, next week, Larry, you're gonna want to tune into this one. So we're gonna have myself, Keith Laughlin, and Chuck Mello. Oh, it's just thundered outside. Wow, we got a big crack. So we're going to be talking grounding and bonding. And Chuck Mello helped put together the SOARS grounding book. So we're going to be talking about one of the most non-controversial topics in the National Electrical Code. It's the most benign, discussions. I mean, no one ever argues about grounding and bonding, right?
Never.
And everybody understands grounding and bonding, right?
Absolutely.
So we're going to be talking about that next Tuesday. Now, it is going to be a recorded session. So, because I'm going to be teaching, but I'm going to break out at lunch and I'm going to be out there chatting it up. So, but Chuck Mello and Keith Laughlin and myself, we're going to be talking about grounding and bonding. And I'll tell you what, if you want to get in on this action, Larry, let me know, because I mean, this stuff is insane. Look how thick this book is.
I'll have to make sure I tune in.
You're going to make sure you tune in?
Yeah.
Awesome. And everybody out there, don't forget to tune in next Tuesday at 12 o'clock. That's why you got to subscribe on the YouTube channel and you got to hit the bell so that whenever you open up your YouTube app, it will let you know that we're going live. And that will be a premiere video that we're going to have out, and we're going to have all the right people watching the chat sessions and answering your questions. This is the time to learn something. So,
can I ask a question though? Is mine a premiere video?
You're live. This is it. I mean, you can't get better than live. I mean, when you can't go live, the second best is premiere.
Okay.
Oh yeah, this is like you're a gold member.
All right.
Okay, and that goes back to another movie. So, what's your parting remarks with regard to the activity for the 2023 cycle of the National Electrical Code, Larry?
Well, I'm just really excited about all the work that's been done. I know that Dave Williams looks like he's listening in, and
yep.
Dave's done a tremendous work on the definitions, and all these people are volunteers and have done a tremendous job in trying to move the code forward. And I think we are making great progress in doing so. And like you said, we're trying to make the code relevant, and that's what we're trying to do. Things are changing fast, and we got to make sure that we keep up.
When do I get my relevant T-shirt?
I'll have to get my wife to put it together for you and send it out.
That sounds like a plan. All right, everybody out there in Tube land, in Facebook land, and in LinkedIn land, and I think I might even be streaming to Twitter. I don't know. I just press a button and I go. Thanks for joining in. This is the end of the session, Larry. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, and I know this means a lot to everybody out there to listen to what you have to say. So I appreciate you taking the time out.
Thanks for inviting me.
Sure thing, brother. All right, everybody, take care, and remember, stay safe and healthy. Larry, hold on. All right, signing off in about 2 seconds. All right, see you next Tuesday.